Okay, let's talk about now from the club. A lot of people didn't know Mavuno from that perspective of it being in that small South Sea Sports Club. Now, the transition of it moving into Bellevue and the explosion of that.
Yeah, I mean...
Because, I mean, from your story, I've not heard you having to lead this many people. So I would like to hear it from...
It was a growth, I mean, because remember, I moved with like a group of people from Nairobi Chapel. So we probably were like 300 adults and about 100 kids when we started. So we didn't start with 5, like many churches, because I remember I came out of Nairobi Chapel. So I had the boost of having been mentored by Pastor Oscar for 10 years, which is what I tell people. I mean, that thing of being finding a mentor, finding somebody's shoulders to stand on is so important in our story and where we need to be as leaders. So when I started, and then I already had been leading, I'd led the church for a year when he was away. So I was very well formed as a leader. So in that time at Bellevue, it was at the club, it was such a good place to incubate. It was a horrible location because the roads were terrible getting in. You know, every time it rained, I mean, you're marooned. In fact, you're praying as you're entering those mud ditches that your car wouldn't get stuck. And people wouldn't come to church. So we stayed that number for a couple of years. And it was very frustrating. I think in the first 3 years, we grew by 100 people. And yet, we had thousands of visitors because Mavuno had a buzz. So people would come, but nobody stayed because the location was horrible. But what that allowed us is a season of incubation. And sometimes that's what God does sometimes. When you're stuck, He's actually allowing you to incubate something. And so that's when we took the whole congregation through Mizizi. We trained them how to take other people through it. And it was almost like He was getting us ready for when we moved. So when we finally got the opportunity to move to Bellevue, I mean, Bellevue was a phenomenal location. I mean, talk about location. It was sizable, huge, I mean, everything you want in a location. And what happened is in 1 month, we grew from 400 people to 1,600 people. I mean, it was, people are just pouring in. Like you're pulling more chairs, more people come. You pull more chairs, next week you buy more chairs, they're full. And from 400 to 1,600. The next month we went to 2,400 people. So it was just insane.
Things like 2 services now comes into play.
We went to 2 services, we went to 3 services. We started an evening service within that first few months. I mean, we had already moved to 3 services. Had we not had our 3 years of incubation, it would have destroyed us. I think you don't want success before you're ready for it. In business, in church, in music, whatever it is you're in. If you get too early your success, you don't have the foundation built for it. So fortunately for us, the foundation was built, but it was still hectic.
Real talk, when you say hectic, what do you mean?
It's like you've got, we're not getting guys from there's some guys from other churches, but you're getting guys from the bar. You've got a church full of guys who have no idea what church is. It was something. I mean, guy comes in, he's sleeping with that guy's wife, and that they're both in church, and the chick is coming to tell you, how can my husband is here with another woman, what are you guys doing? I mean, it was at that level. It was like...
It came with its new monkeys.
There was chaos. Yeah. It was chaos. I mean, lots of people who are hungry for God. They need someone to disciple them, take them through Mizizi.
You don't have enough people.
You don't have people. So actually I had to go and tell people, like I'd see a wife and her husband leading a group, and I'm like, that's too much. You two can't be in the same group. You go lead that one. It was like, we actually got into a season where we just had to use any available leader to help us disciple people. But again, the system held, the people held, because we had taken the 3 years to prepare.
I remember I get it now. You always used to say, all of you guys here, where we're headed to, you're all leaders. You're all associates.
Everybody has to lead. And that's what happened. We got to a place where everybody was leading. You couldn't sit at and you've been coming to this church for 3 years. Get in the mix, lead people. So everybody was involved, and it was crazy, but it was actually a very exciting time. I think also just figuring out how to manage the growth, how to hire staff, because now you're having to hire new people. There's a lot of management as well, because many times when pastors go to theology school, you're not taught business.
Yes.
But when you're running a church with 2,400 people, you're adults actually. You're running an enterprise. It really is. Nobody taught you about finance. Nobody taught you about HR. Nobody taught you about IT. Nobody taught you about facilities. All that stuff you're doing, you have to become an expert at. And that's what happens to many entrepreneurs. You start something and then it outgrows you if you're not careful. So
And let's also be real, the kind of finances that Mavuno was making because of the target audience that you were getting.
Exactly. So people
one
are
guy
giving.
could tithe what other churches would tithe.
People are giving, and we're teaching people to give. And again, the other thing about it is when you reach people who are not, who don't have a church background, they take God at His word. When God says give, they don't ask, but in my last church, they're like, okay, if that's what God says, they're not giving to the pastor, they're giving to God. So in a sense, I feel like there was the culture that was created was a very generous, and until today, Mavuno is a very generous church. But we, fortunately, again, the background at Chapel had given us very strong, robust systems. So we came knowing your books are always audited. You know, there's always an auditor. You always have a finance team, a professional finance team handling your money. Pastors never touch money. They requisition for it just like in any corporate. HR systems so that you know this is how people are hired, this is how people are released, policies. So we borrowed a lot of the infrastructure that we had from Nairobi Chapel. And I'm very fortunate. If we didn't have that, I suspect we could have collapsed. The growth would have actually destroyed us. But fortunately, we had that background that allowed us to be able to manage some of that growth. So we entered a season where the church was growing. Now, where before we had been doing radical things in like a little glass bowl and nobody's really seeing them, now anything we did was news. Because all of a sudden you're the church that everybody's watching. And because nobody had ever done it. I mean, some of the things we did 14 years ago, 13 years ago, now would look very commonplace.
E.g. live streaming.
We were live streaming our services. We were doing secular music and taking it back. There were things that we were
advertising
doing.
On Capital FM.
I was on a secular radio station talking about our next sermon series and just discussing issues with listeners.
I remember even when NTV went live for the first time, they went live with the Mavuno services.
Yeah, it was actually Citizen that started.
Oh, it was Citizen.
Yeah, Citizen started, yeah. So, we were doing things that also put us in the limelight a lot. But we weren't doing them to look popular or to be cool. We were doing them because the question we kept asking is, where's our target audience? Then we must be there. If they're here, if they're listening to Capital FM, then we must be in Capital FM. So that's what drove our ethos in that sense. And as a result, then you entered a glass bowl where everybody was watching you. They're watching to see what you do. We had sermons preached against us.
As a leader, how was that? Because now you see, you're the target. So people would say Mavuno and then they say positive things about Mavuno, very positive things, and you are the recipient. However, there's also a group of people who would say a lot of negative things, and the bullseye is the only two people I would know would be you and Kanji. In terms of, I'm not negating the other pastors, but
we're the most visible.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, again, incubation is so important. Remember the story. Having been with Pastor Oscar for 13 years, having studied abroad and been even interned by pastors who are more experienced, having done all the research and study, I think those things gave me an idea of what are we doing? Why are we doing this? I mean, if you remember, we actually got off, we got onto, Citizen actually approached us. We didn't actually even approach them about being on live TV. We did it for 3 months and actually went and told the CEO of Citizen, we don't want to do this anymore.
Exactly.
And at that point, he was like, why in the world? He's like, every Sunday I come and give you live streaming, that's 1 million shillings I'm giving you. Why wouldn't you want that? And for me, the thought was, actually, I don't think God didn't call us to create consumers who just sit at home and turn us on and turn us off. God wanted us to disciple people. And because I knew what we were doing, then it was an opportunity that was driving. It was almost like, is this opportunity getting us to where God is calling us to go? So in a sense, I feel a lot of what drove me at that point was, am I hitting the bullseye with the right people? And so long as I'm hearing stories of transformation, so long as people's lives so long as people are coming close to God, they're discovering their purpose, they're following Jesus, then I'm willing to handle. And I even was willing to take the flak for my team. Many times I actually took the emails, the hate mail, and I just read them and I burnt them, or I didn't pass them on. My team didn't even know half of the stuff I received. And because I was like, it won't help them. I'm happy to actually protect them in that sense. And I think that's what leadership has to do. At some point, you have to know, am I convicted enough about what I'm doing that I'm willing to keep going regardless? It was interesting that at some point, what ended up happening is, like I said, the most suspicion was from the church.
It's true.
But something began to shift. And what happened, the first thing that began to happen is a lot of the youth in the church started coming to Mavuno. No, that was not our intention. In fact, we used to tell guys, if you're coming from your church, go and greet them next Sunday. This is a church for guys who are, we were really targeting guys who are not in church. But young people still wanted an expression and they weren't getting it. So they started coming. So I think what would happen is you'd find a bunch of your young people have all moved to Mavuno. And then the bishop who's been bashing us would actually say, let me go and see what those guys are doing because my kids are even going there. Because we had a whole bunch of bishops' kids coming at that point. Yeah. And what would happen is that as they came, they would listen to the message and they'll be like, these guys are Christians. And I think I remember sitting down with a couple of people saying, you know, we actually didn't know who you are. We just heard stories and we assumed those stories were true. But I came and had a message and I said, I'm glad my kids are in this church. And I feel like that started dissipating the heat. But secondly, I think Bishop Oscar has such high respect in the city. And because of his cover, in a sense, people almost said, these guys, we don't know about them, but because Pastor Oscar seems to think they're okay, then maybe they're not too bad, you know. So I think those two things began to work in our favor in a sense. And the needle began to tilt and we stopped getting so much flack from the church like we did in the first days.
Okay, back to the book. Forgive me, Pastor, for not getting the title right.
Yeah. Seasons. I probably need to change that title. That's what it's telling me.
No.
Just stick with seasons. Stick with seasons. Yeah.
What happens in this 30 to 40? Because this is the age.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now this is a season when if you know your purpose, you're supposed to build something. Because all of us were created to create a solution for society. You get? So every one of us, I mean, for you it was CTA and continues to be. And what does it mean to change the airwaves of our country? And for every one of us, there is a solution that you're uniquely supposed to bring to this earth. And that's what your purpose has to do with. But if you don't take time in your 20s to discover your purpose, then in your 30s, you can't be focused on it. If you know your purpose, your 30s is when now you build the organization that will deliver your purpose, your solution. And for me, that was Mavuno. It's the vehicle to deliver our purpose. And for me, the purpose is my generation has to be reached and understand their purpose. And Mavuno is the tool, the church that God uses to help my generation get to know their purpose. And not just Mavuno, but other churches who are impacted by Mavuno and begin to understand, actually, the gospel is relevant to young people as well. So many churches have had that influence, and I thank God for that. But the 30s is when you now shut your ears, close down opportunities, and just hone down on the one thing that you're supposed to be, and just put the energy, the time, the hours to build that solution. And that's what we were doing in our 30s. I mean, I rarely spoke outside Mavuno. I rarely did anything not Mavuno related. It was very focused on building the solution. And because of that, I think we've been able to grow. I mean, one of my big focuses was raising leaders. We're able to raise many, many, many leaders who are able to multiply Mavuno. That's how we have many different Mavuno churches. But we're also able to say, this is the DNA of Mavuno. This is what this church looks like. This is the kind of influence that we want this church to have. So we've been very intentional right from the beginning of this is what we want to be about. And that's what the 30s were about. Yeah. So through the book, Seasons, my hope is every single person will begin to discover this is the goal I was created for. And then to say, how do I spend time now focusing in building this? Because it takes work. It's just raw, sheer work. Yeah.
Okay, we'll be back. Let's take another break, change some batteries. We'll come back for the last chapter.